Today, we're going on a nostalgic journey to rediscover 12 pies that used to be family favorites across America, but have practically vanished from our tables. We'll dig into their history, flavors, and the special memories they hold. Number 1. Buttermilk Pie. This creamy and subtly tangy dessert once graced countless kitchen tables, especially in the 1930s through the 1950s, when traditional baking relied heavily on pantry staples. Home cooks could whip it up with just eggs, sugar, butter, and a splash of buttermilk. According to many vintage recipe collections and old cooking magazines from that time, the simplicity of buttermilk pie was exactly what made it so popular among baby boomers growing up. During family gatherings in the 1970s, older relatives recalled that the best versions often used fresh buttermilk delivered straight from local dairies. As processed foods became more common, though, people drifted toward flashier flavors, and buttermilk pie started to fade away from the dinner table. Some folks who remember the taste say it evokes feelings of warmth and nostalgia, reminiscent of old commercials that promoted pure, wholesome ingredients. Current online sources, including over 100 cooking websites and YouTube channels with retro-themed recipes, still celebrate buttermilk pie for that distinctive tang. Modern variations sometimes add a hint of lemon zest or nutmeg to enhance the flavor, but the original essence remains tied to a simpler era of American baking. Many Gen Xers who discovered it through grandparents' recipe cards describe it as a hidden gem of the golden age of home cooking, capturing a part of old America that younger generations rarely experience. Number 2. Chess pie. Another classic that lived large in old America is chess pie, closely related to buttermilk pie, but with an even richer, denser texture. Dating back to recipes from 19th century cookbooks, chess pie held on through the 20th century as a reliable comfort food. In the 1940s and 1950s, housewives often served it after a Sunday roast or at neighborhood socials, sprinkling the top with just a dusting of cornmeal or a fine layer of sugar for added crunch. Multiple references in nostalgic baby boomer cookbooks describe chess pie as a guaranteed crowd pleaser that required minimal fuss, which was essential in an era where scratch-made baking was expected. Its ingredients, sugar, eggs, butter, and a bit of cornmeal, came straight from a well-stocked pantry, reflecting a thrifty mindset that defined much of mid-century American life. The golden custard and slightly caramelized top are what made chess pie stand out in old commercials extolling homemade desserts. Although it has become overshadowed by fancier pies like salted caramel or complex chocolate creations, many historical cooking channels on YouTube and recipe boards across the internet still rank it high. Devoted fans say the sweet, buttery bite reminds them of a grandmother's recipe box and simpler times, while new generations just discovering it often praise it for its unpretentious flavor. It's one of those slices of Americana that seems to instantly transport people back to a more relaxed era when neighbors gathered on front porches on warm summer evenings. Number 3. Vinegar Pie. The very name often confuses modern bakers, yet vinegar pie was a staple during the Great Depression and continued to appear in old Hollywood films where resourceful characters made do with limited ingredients. In the 1930s and 1940s, people turned to vinegar pie because fruit was scarce and expensive in some regions. Historical documents from that period mention how a splash of vinegar mimicked the tartness of lemon in the filling, creating an economical substitute that preserved the sensation of a fruit-based dessert. Family recipe notebooks and old diaries from baby boomers sometimes mention how the tangy flavor balanced well with a sweet, thick custard. By the 1970s, though, fresh citrus fruits became more affordable, and vinegar pie drifted into obscurity. Even so, there's a retro revival happening now. More than 100 online articles and YouTube homesteading channels highlight vinegar pie as a novelty worth revisiting, praising its cleverness and surprising taste. Older Americans who grew up in farming communities recall that it was a real treat during tough times. The pie's unique flavor might catch newcomers off guard, but a well-balanced recipe actually tastes like a delicate sweet and sour custard. It exemplifies how resourcefulness shaped many classic American recipes during the 20th century and remains a fascinating artifact of an era defined by creativity in the kitchen. Number 4. Transparent pie. Largely associated with Kentucky and parts of the Midwest, transparent pie earned a place on family tables in the early to mid-20th century, primarily because of its silky custard and the slight caramelization that happens as it bakes. according to multiple sources analyzed in old newspaper clippings and interviews with baby boomers. The filling's transparency once symbolized that nothing is hidden in homemade cooking. Everything was simple and from scratch. Some local diners during the 1950s and 1960s touted transparent pie as their signature dessert, where traveling salesmen and families alike would stop by for a slice that was both comforting and straightforward. Yet over time, bigger dessert trends like banana cream pies with whipped toppings and later mass-produced sweets overshadowed this delicate classic. Currently, a few traditional bakeries in small American towns are reviving transparent pie, thanks in part to nostalgic YouTube reviews and vintage cooking blogs. Influenced by the older generations who vividly remember ordering it at mom-and-pop restaurants, the pie's recipe remains mostly unchanged. Eggs, sugar, butter, and cream, baked until the filling sets into a pale golden color. Those who have rediscovered it say the texture is somewhat like a denser version of sugar cream pie, with a subtle flavor that pairs well with a cup of coffee. Its presence in local fairs and festivals serves as a reminder of a time when life moved more slowly, and even a simple slice of pie felt like a special event. Number 5. Grape pie. While many Americans enjoy grape-flavored soda or jelly, grape pie never really became a nationwide hit. Yet it was a cherished treat in certain parts of the country, especially upstate New York. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, roadside stands in these regions sold Concord grapes each autumn, and resourceful home cooks experimented by using them in pies. Many older Gen Xers recall picking grapes with parents and grandparents, then squishing the pulp by hand for pie fillings. A messy but memorable tradition. Community cookbooks from the mid-20th century show that grape pie was recognized for its beautiful purple hue and slightly tangy flavor balanced by sugar. The vivid color often caught people's eye at potlucks, but the labor-intensive process to peel and seed the grapes discouraged many from making it regularly. As supermarkets expanded their offerings, families seemed to gravitate more toward quick-fix pies, leaving grape pie behind as a labor of love. More recently, food historians and cooking vloggers on YouTube have highlighted grape pie's nostalgic appeal, referencing archived cooking segments from the 1970s that showcased local harvest festivals. Some modern shortcuts include using seedless grapes or store-bought grape fillings, though purists argue that the authentic taste comes only from traditional Concord grapes. The pie's rarity today makes it a kind of culinary time capsule, reminding people of orchard visits, the smell of fresh fruit in the air, and the close-knit feeling of small-town America in a bygone era. Number 6. Sugar cream pie. Hailed as Indiana's official state pie, sugar cream pie once felt ubiquitous throughout the Midwest in the 20th century. It consists of cream, sugar, butter, and a bit of cornstarch or flour to thicken, resulting in a sweet, silky filling topped with cinnamon or nutmeg. References to sugar cream pie can be found in countless local church cookbooks and family scrapbooks dating from the 1930s onward, where home bakers proudly showcase their region's signature dessert. By the 1960s, it was often promoted in local diners and small restaurants, featured in old commercials that played before drive-in movies. However, as faster lifestyles took hold and the idea of quick-to-bake or ready-made pies became standard, sugar cream pie started to vanish from everyday meals. In recent years, a wave of nostalgia has brought it back in certain circles. Over 100 articles and YouTube cooking demonstrations highlight how simple it is to make if you follow the traditional stovetop technique. Boomers sometimes comment how a slice of sugar cream pie is like traveling back to childhood, when neighbors swapped recipes and entire communities came together over homemade food. The pie's hallmark is its smooth, custard-like center that's neither too heavy nor too light, capturing the essence of a Midwest comfort dessert that exemplifies a golden age of down-home American cooking. Number 7. Shoofly pie. Known largely in Pennsylvania Dutch country, Shoofly pie spread to broader American culture through word of mouth and local fairs during the mid-20th century. The name reputedly comes from the sweet molasses aroma that drew flies, which people had to shoo away. In the 1940s and 1950s, baby boomers living in rural areas often enjoyed this pie as a breakfast item or an afternoon pick-me-up with coffee. The crumbly topping and deep molasses flavor set it apart from typical fruit pies, creating a distinctively rich, slightly earthy taste. By the 1970s and 1980s, mainstream grocery stores were focusing on more standardized desserts and Shoofly pie, which sometimes demanded specialty ingredients like blackstrap molasses, started to slip off the radar. However, references to Shoofly pie still pop up in discussions of old America and nostalgia for simpler times. Traditional Amish communities keep the tradition alive, and YouTube videos demonstrating the recipe have gained traction among people looking to reconnect with heritage baking. Multiple archived articles and mid-century cooking shows highlight Shoofly pie's curious consistency, a bit gooey on the bottom and cakey on top. It has been called a coffee cake in a crust by some enthusiasts. Though overshadowed by modern dessert trends, Shoofly pie remains a testament to the resourceful spirit of 20th century home bakers, as well as a sweet reminder of how unique regional dishes can capture people's imagination even decades later. Number 8. Green tomato pie. While tomatoes are generally associated with savory dishes, resourceful cooks during the 20th century found ways to use every last piece of garden produce. Particularly during the 1930s and 1940s, when money and food supplies were often tight, green tomato pie emerged as a clever way to mimic the taste and texture of apple pie. Recipes from that era, documented in homestead diaries and local newspapers, often mixed sliced green tomatoes with sugar, cinnamon, and a little vinegar or lemon juice, resulting in a sweet and tart filling that surprised many first-time tasters. In the 1950s and 1960s, some farming communities passed these recipes down through generations, so baby boomers in rural areas grew up eating green tomato pie without giving it a second thought. But as produce distribution became more widespread, having lots of leftover green tomatoes became less of a concern, and the pie eventually faded. More recently, however, there's been a wave of interest in sustainable cooking, with over 100 blog posts, articles, and YouTube garden-to-table demonstrations, reintroducing green tomato pie as a nostalgic slice of old-fashioned ingenuity. Boomers often chuckle at the memory of first tasting it and exclaiming in surprise that it tasted almost exactly like a spiced apple pie. It's now considered a quirky piece of America's culinary past, reflecting how families adapted their recipes in the face of shortages or seasonal limitations, embodying that never-waste-a-thing mindset of earlier generations. Number 9. Jefferson Davis pie. Sometimes called Kentucky pie or Jefferson Davis pie, this distinctive dessert has roots stretching back to the mid-1800s. It is a rich concoction of brown sugar, eggs, butter, and chopped nuts, often pecans, which gives it a slight resemblance to pecan pie, but the custard-like texture sets it apart. In the 1930s and 1940s, older cookbooks labeled it a luxurious treat, possibly because nuts were not always plentiful. By the 1950s and 1960s, Jefferson Davis pie appeared in some southern diners, capturing that golden age feeling of roadside stops and small-town eateries. Baby boomers who grew up in the region often associate it with holiday gatherings or Sunday lunches after church. The subtle spice notes differ from one family recipe to another, reflecting variations passed down over decades. Over time, though, pecan pie's popularity overshadowed this dessert, with supermarkets selling pre-made pecan pies in bright packages by the 1970s. Jefferson Davis pie gradually slipped from mainstream awareness, showing up only in certain local cookbooks and small historical societies. Now, a new generation of retro food bloggers and enthusiastic home bakers are reviving it, intrigued by its link to vintage Americana. Some YouTube channels dive deep into the recipe's background, analyzing archived materials and local newspaper clippings. Fans who rediscover the pie say that First Bite conjures up old family photos, telling stories about big gatherings, southern front porches, and the comfortable rhythms of community life in 20th century America. Number 10. Gooseberry pie. Gooseberries once grew in backyard gardens across many parts of the United States, and gooseberry pie was a beloved treat for those who appreciated a tart, refreshing taste. Baby boomers and even older Gen Xers recall foraging for wild gooseberries or picking them from bushes in grandma's yard during the 1960s. The fruit's tangy flavor needed plenty of sugar, but it offered a bright contrast to the sugary sweetness found in more conventional pies. According to various sources from vintage recipe archives and local extension office bulletins, gooseberry pie popped up frequently in community cookbooks and was a highlight at rural fairs. Some folks relate that the pie was a sign of early summer when the berries were ripe and families got together for canning and baking. But gooseberries didn't scale up commercially as easily as apples or peaches, so by the 1970s, fewer grocery stores carried them. This scarcity nudged gooseberry pie into the realm of special interest or local curiosity. Today, a revival is brewing in niche baking communities and among nostalgia seekers who track down heirloom seeds. Over 100 internet posts, blog articles, and small YouTube channels dedicated to heritage gardening now champion gooseberries. The pie's distinctive tartness appeals to those tired of overly sweet treats. Although it might be harder to find the fruit nowadays, tasting a slice of gooseberry pie evokes memories of simpler days, bringing back the ambiance of old farmland, garden fences, and the sun-drenched warmth of summer afternoons in mid-20th century America. Number 11. Oatmeal Pie. Sometimes called faux pecan pie, oatmeal pie gained a measure of popularity in the 1950s and 1960s among thrifty bakers, particularly in the South and Midwest. Families who couldn't readily afford the cost of pecans often turned to oatmeal to achieve a similar consistency and sweetness. Many baby boomers recount seeing oatmeal pie listed at diners alongside more familiar options, though it never became quite as famous. The filling typically includes brown sugar, eggs, butter, and oats that form a caramelized layer on top. Historical references in church fundraiser cookbooks from the 1970s show that oatmeal pie was sometimes labeled as a comfort dessert ideal for potlucks. During that era, TV commercials pushed processed snack cakes and cereals, and maybe that also influenced some creative home cooks to incorporate rolled oats in unexpected ways. Over time, as the economy grew, pecans became more accessible, diminishing the need for a substitute. Many people simply forgot about oatmeal pie, and it faded from mainstream memory. Recently, however, a wave of old-timey cooking enthusiasm has led to renewed curiosity. Several YouTube channels dedicated to vintage recipes have posted tutorials, comparing it to the nostalgic flavor of old commercials that romanticized homemade breakfasts and sweet desserts. Those who rediscover oatmeal pie praise its toasty, slightly chewy texture. It holds a special place for folks who grew up in households that celebrated resourcefulness, reminding them that even when budgets were tight, creativity could bring something delightfully sweet to the table. Number 12. Mock apple pie. Perhaps the most surprising entry on this list, mock apple pie shot to fame in part due to a famous cracker manufacturer's recipe that used crumbled crackers, sugar, and cinnamon to imitate the flavor of apples. Starting in the 1930s and continuing through the 1950s, numerous families embraced it because fresh apples weren't always available year-round. Old ads in magazines portrayed it as a culinary trick that would amaze guests. By the 1960s, baby boomers growing up in suburbia sometimes made it for school bake sales or 4-H competitions, delighting judges when they discovered that, despite the name, no apples were actually in the filling. With the rise of more convenient fruit imports in the 1970s and 1980s, mock apple pie steadily lost its magic, overshadowed by genuine apple pies that became easier to produce. However, modern-day food historians and curiosity seekers have revisited the recipe in YouTube videos, blog posts, and local nostalgia segments. Many express surprise at how convincing the taste is, even if the concept seems strange in the era of global fruit distribution. Digging into archived interviews, some older Americans recall that the novelty factor was a big part of mock apple pie's charm, especially during holiday gatherings when the dessert table showcased a mix of real and imitation fruit pies. Tasting it today can still trigger memories of 20th century resourcefulness, that classic sense of playful experimentation, and a world where families gathered around the kitchen table, swapping stories that bridged generations.